Hello everybody, Steve Griffiths here, developer of the MTPredictor software program. In today's MTPredictor video, I'd like to look at the USE minis, but particularly I'd like to look at the NQ, and in particular this TS1 buy setup here, because this was what we call a Holy Grail trade setup. But before we get to that, I just want to take a look at the USE minis on the higher time frame. Remember, for standard MTPredictor users, we look at the STF color, which is our indicator down here, red for a downtrend, blue for an up, black for a flat trend. So initially you can see that this was actually against a red STF, so standard traders wouldn't have considered this. But we had a look at this in our advanced training webinar for customers yesterday, and we were discussing this particular trade setup. So first I want to go over the higher time frames and have a look at how we use that for support and resistance. So for this we go out to the 15-minute chart, and one of our customers actually pointed this out while we were doing the training yesterday, is that on the 15-minute chart of the NQ, this low here, which was actually the low of the day yesterday, was actually at DP support. In fact, it was actually an automatic trade set up there as well. But what do I mean but at DP support? Well, our DPs are leading indicators. They are placed on the chart by going back to a prior pivot, for example here, right mouse click, place decision point, and these levels are out on the chart in advance. Just to give you an idea of this, I can place a DP level on here and you can see it's out there before the market even gets there. So anyway, there we were, noticing that as the NQ came down to this particular point in time here, it was at DP support. What I'll do is I'll just put a box around that so that level stays on our chart when we go down to the shorter time frame. Remember, these levels are there in advance. They are what we call leading indicators. So this looked all very good on the NQ. However, what we were talking about as well is ideally we like to see all three markets, the NQ, the ES, particularly the ES, because that's the one that we call the boss, because it's the one that tends to be the most important because it has the most shares in the S&P 500. And NQ and YM, we all like to see, well, we like to see them doing all the same thing. It gives us a higher confidence trade. So what we did mention is because the YM, so yeah, this is the N, so the NQ. So the NQ was actually at DP support. If we go to the YM and we did exactly the same thing, we had a DP off this low here. And as you can see, the YM didn't actually reach the decision point support like the NQ did. Same with the ES. If we go to the ES, exactly the same kind of thing. Although it made a double bottom here, it wasn't at our DP support. So what we were saying is because all three markets weren't coming into their large degree support at the same time, if you were going to trade the NQ, it's what we call a slightly higher risk trade. In other words, it's a little bit more aggressive for the more confident and aggressive MTPredictor users. So let's go back to the NQ and take a bit more of a detailed look at this. So there we were on the 15-minute chart, coming into very nice and clear decision point support. And in fact, actually, if we right mouse click, do Elliott wave intermediate, this was also a nice 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 wave 5 coming in at that low there as well. So let's now go down to the 3-minute chart. So what does that mean? Right, if you remember, I placed a little rectangle around the 15-minute support zone, so that shows clearly how this low here was at 15-minute support. So in other words, because that was at important support, the initial rally off the low would be considered a wave 1. The initial correction into here would be considered a wave 2. We have it labelled wave 2 or B in the software because it's a bit more generic and it could be a wave C up. However, because this is an important low here, this is actually a wave 1, a wave 2. After a wave 2, we tend to get a strong wave 3 kind of swing, which is exactly what unfolded. So how can we trade this? Well, the way we trade this is we look for automatic setups, and here we had a TS1 buy setup. Notice it's against an STF red color, and our Holy Grail trade setups will normally be against this because they're normally the first correction in a new move, therefore will be very, very early in the new trend. So let's place the analysis on this TS1 buy setup. Standard buy setup, apart from it's against the STF colour. The only difference we make now is we don't go to the first target because we are assuming this is a wave 2. We're actually looking for the typical wave 3 WPT, which is up here. So if I now place the risk reward on at that level, in other words up to the typical wave 3 WPT, you can see that this would have given a potential trade of 5 to 1. A very, very nice trade indeed. Remember, we use correct position sizing to vary our number of lots, contracts or shares to keep our initial risk small, but more important, to keep our profits large in relation to the initial risks. And as you can see, the market unfolded absolutely perfectly up to this level here, very, very nicely. So you could have decided to take a 5R profit, in other words a profit of 5 times the initial risk at that level, or you could have come down to the STF when it reached that level there and seen that the STF was strong, in other words the indicator was beyond our strength band, which is our grey line, and therefore you could have trailed with our ATR stop, which is our blue dots there, and that would have taken the profit up to at that level there. You'd have been stopped out there, and it would have been a very nice 7R profit. So a profit of 7 times the initial risk was a very nice trade indeed. One thing I did say at the time in the webinar was because all 3 USE minis, I wasn't particularly looking at the Russell Index yesterday, just the ES, NQ and YM. Because all 3 weren't in 15-minute support all at the same time, this would have been a slightly higher risk trade. So therefore what you could have done is once it reached the 100% initial risk level, which it did at 26.75 here, you could have then brought your stop to break even to make it a risk-free trade. And that would have held you in and had exactly the same result. So there you go, a very, very nice trade there, albeit slightly more aggressive because all 3 markets weren't telling you the same thing. But looking at just the NQ, I want to just go through the steps again, because this is what we call a Holy Grail trade setup, and these are so good is because they are trading the wave 3, and as such the wave 3 is the strongest and longest wave in a completed 5-wave sequence. Therefore the profits tend to be the largest in relation to the initial risk, and this is my favourite MTPredictor trade setup, and it's why I actually designed MTPredictor over 13 years ago in the first place. So let's go through the steps we do for this. First of all, we go to a higher time frame, in this case the 15-minute chart. We look for larger degree support, which we had coming in at this low here. We then move down to the shorter time frame. We then assume that the pivot that's coming in at the large degree support is an important pivot. In other words, it's a place where we can start our Elliott wave sequence from. Very logical, because it's an important pivot, because it's coming in at higher time frame support. The initial move off that important pivot would be a wave 1. The initial correction off that would be a wave 2. Typically wave 2s unfold in ABC minor pattern, which is exactly what we had here. So therefore this would be a great trade to look to buy. In Elliott wave terms, a wave 2, which then would be followed by a potential wave 3. WD Gann also said this was the best place to buy shares on the initial correction in a new trend, which is exactly the Elliott wave 2. Our first target would be the typical wave 3, like we've seen already, and as such you would be anticipating a strong move. So that's the criteria we're looking for. Higher time frame, support in this case, move down to the lower time frame, initial move off that will be wave 1, initial correction will be wave 2, wave 2 has to subdivide into a minor ABC pattern. We then look to take the trade setups off that. Our initial target would be the typical wave 3, we then wait till the market gets there, manage the trade accordingly. And as you can see, the result of this was a lovely 7.1R profit. So a great example of an MTPredictor Holy Grail trade setup unfolding on the NQ yesterday. These are the MTP RT add-ons for NinjaTrader 7, which I've been using in today's video.